Part 3 summary. So back to Leipzig, Germany, the monument of all monuments. The monuments to Napoleon, the monuments for all wars. It really was the monument for all wars, that crossroads. Since the Aztecs jumped and infected our timeline, they spread their influence like wildfire. That was put out. The Aztecs were following a demonic blueprint that was composed of galactic domination. They were going to make an alliance with the Nazis, but I think the Nazis lied to them, pretended like they were interested in their methods. They seemed to want to stir up a pact in their different methods for world domination together. There was a night at the Leipzig monument where the Nazi forces came in. Yes, that's true. But what they brought with them was a Nazi bell, the biggest Nazi bell and time device they have ever gotten their hands on. The the goal was to anchor this bell into the top of the Aztec temple. That was the temple of all temples for them. And when they thought that they had the world under their control. So the bell came in, they were going to put the bell on at night, have the ball lightning go off of it, just like you see in Tesla pictures, but it didn't go as planned because they would have probably ended the world if these two forces and groups would have made the alliance. So the Aztecs were sacrificing continually there at the temple in Leipzig, throwing young virgins down into the floor that opened up into a hellish portal. Panthers or another cat would come, devour the body, manifest. Then the pools attached there were for the blood flow to come in and out. So they also had a liquid, going back to how these builders built. I told you about the brewers, how they made the bricks. But with the bricks, this is why America was built literally on blood, was because they had a liquid that they dipped the bricks into in the smelting factories, and they also dipped them in blood to leave a death essence on them in their building. So these are cursed buildings. This created a spell casting in the atmosphere and a sickening in the atmosphere. Um, we can do this nowadays with antennas, frequency pulses, broadcasts, different methods, but they just put it up there. And they were building on blood. They realized that the bricks dipped in blood were experiencing a black decay too fast, and they looked too dark in the landscapes, like a building would turn black. So then they changed it up a little bit. They needed to put some flash on it, some gold, to prove that they created the most colorful, beautiful things in the world, to prove that then they were the creators of the last standing empire of Earth. Because the Draconians, the Reptilians, the hierarchies had already taken over them, already convinced them that they created them. They forgot who their creator was. So they were just on an insane mission. They mined different types of stone, used various different techniques with hand energy tools. They were perfectionists and world crafters, the best artisans on earth. And they blended in among us like cockroaches over time. They've subverted the wills of humans in a forced acceptance rate by oppressing them more and more, putting them under the guillotine over and over each day. So most people just lost their will and they got drained like batteries, and they needed to get their willpower back. And then over time, the buildings became lighter, and then they just blended in with different landscapes and different time periods. Kansas is also called Bloody Kansas because they gouged it. They gouged the whole state of all of its beauty, except for Little Jerusalem. Um, they also took over the ancient giant building in Niagara Falls, put their final touches on that one too. Now back to Leipzig, the reason why they had four main chiefs sitting there is because they were the four Inca gods, the four demigods, as they thought they were at the top level and top dogs of the world, stemming from the four Inca brothers that they carried into our timeline and put it on display, like the Adolphus building, wrapping them in a cocoon, saying, "Look at what we did to you humans." The sacrifice statue shows one holding a girl that's resisting a Mayan that's holding her by her arms, ready to sacrifice her. So they would laugh at their victims struggling, and then they'd love to watch them fall into the pit and die. And the Nazis were aimed at overtopping them, doing a one upper, but told them that they would make an alliance with them to finalize whatever plan with the tech there was. They were going to put their Nazi Bell technology, like I said, at the top of their pyramid. That didn't end up getting activated, and that was a secret mission that got stopped. There was divine intervention there and a secret space program there. This alliance would have wiped out civilization as we know it. So the cover story was Napoleon's monument, Leipzig, Germany, was a war of all wars because this and that happened and this and that led to that, and why it doesn't make sense. So we had to use techniques learned about the masonry and the fire drilling, tech sculpting to change the faces to the best that they could be changed to not look as they were, which were all Mayan gods in nature. That's why they look so weird. And for Mount Rushmore, they blew it up because they were going to put their faces on there too to establish a base there. The military took that over, blew it up, changed it up, and then they put a base there, uncovered things that were hidden there so nothing like this would ever happen there again. And that's why Custer's monument definitely should be there. The Aztec twins on the other statue across from the sacrificed girl are sucking on a woman's breast. Now, these were also the Mayan heroes, the twins, the Mayan twins, the Inca Aztec twins in the stories, on their insane quest to grid work their culture as a heroic one and superior one for final all time, the grand finale. So, as we saw many times in the superior rings versus the inferior rings in a climb to Aztec conquest to be superior, like Lake Superior is embedded with this past. That's why it's the superior lake, because the inferiors fought in the lower basins. So these two twins that the woman's holding in the statue are two demigods to come. So the Nazi pairing that wasn't fulfilled to create the fifth sun, the fifth empire, the new world, happened here. They perceived this end as being the way past the fifth sun, and then the Nazi black sun paired with the Aztec demonic red demon sun, the red sun, black sun thing that formed into the insignia that the Nazis wore, red and black, to display that they were ready to make an alliance in this otherworldly sun creation of false light and imperial rule. You had a black sun and a red sun from the Aztecs. So the 60s had many NSA reasons of national security to demolish many ritualistic strongholds and mansions of the Gilded Age and rid ourselves finally of this past and other connecting structures, who most likely are all connected to tunnels still. So the land and the people who would inhabit it in the future could heal and not be affected by the psychosocial sickness that permeated the essence of places and cities and leftover apparatuses that could cause mental trauma to people and physiological damage to their systems. If there was too much evidence in a building, say like if a Mayan had died there or something, or supernatural activities happened, it would be demolished. You had to cover up all the evidence. The other races charged up power tools to sculpt perfectly with and heat up stone upon stone with. So these techniques were used to alter buildings and to alter the past. Backed by laws, passed, and urban renewals, this was accomplished, as well as architectural and real estate shifts and trends and shifts in social economic statuses and whatever excuses there were to do all these things. So Art Deco was a made-up word to describe the vibe of the old empire structures that had peppered the land, while others in the 1800s were living in wood-framed houses. When they would see these buildings, it didn't make sense to them. Sometimes they couldn't mentally handle the shifting and the quantum changes that were around them to process it and make sense of it. So civilization has had to run its own course in this secret war, this war with the Blackhearts, one of America's true histories. So civilization has had to curve itself until it reaches a level where there's enough mental capacity balanced with spiritual proportions to handle 0-point energy for one, to use for benevolent purposes, and other things have been calculated. Cincinnati, Ohio train station was a rite of passage for all the residences of the land networks, and it ran not as a free enterprise, but as an intercontinental species run by hybrids with staffs and thrones and scepters and classes of rank. And it was an amping up station, like you'd go charge up a Tesla, but on a 100 times more scale level just for one weapon. And yes, there were hundreds of languages of natives, and anything and everything is still sketchy pre-revolution, though. Society has had society had to have its schism. Let's say these schisms, we'll call them. It's a schism patched in our subconscious trauma levels. There had to be enough time for all of these things to be relieved. That's why I use the term things that are time locked. For the timeline convergence pattern to work, this amount of breathing space and this amount of room had to happen. And people to start producing human capital, getting our nation going. They couldn't do this if they were stuck in a place of the past and traumatized. So to heal the schism, the remedy was putting people away who saw discrepancies all around them into these asylums all over that were handily available, like megalithic retirement homes that were waiting for you. And then after the war at Niagara Falls, like I said, there were intelligence groups that went around looking for survivors of the old world to see how many there were. And if there were any, say, elders of a Native American tribe, they were silenced. Okay, this breathing space, this 100 years of breathing room we had, was also to see if the human mind could accept the convergence. They were tested in their acceptance rates of certain things when timelines overlapped again with the Nazi bell, meddling, and frequency bars that crossed the world to quantumly change and entangle things. That was the breaking point. There would be objects from the future, like electric trolleys, showing up that had to be modified and documented in pictures pulled by horses to try to make sense of anything that didn't make sense that would appear in the overlapping timelines. Okay, there's pictures of horses pulling modified trolleys right alongside electric trolleys going side by side on the grid work of the street. Things like that. Now, the Cathedral of Learning in the Old World was like a re-education center in Pittsburgh. You didn't want to go there. That was MK Ultra conditioning, but with the Mayans. A lot of tech was used for power that drove the leaders to be ruthless and insane. Asylums in the 1800s were the size of villages for those who questioned the time frame, powers that used to be, and the current framework versus the past that no one wanted to even think back on. Their psyches couldn't handle it, and much of the populace disappeared into institutions that were spread all across the nation because of everybody's fragile psyches and the experimentation that went on. This left many orphans as well. History didn't want to reiterate the gore or look at it after a while. The people from the New York City area wanted to go explore the New World. They did come by boats, yes, the Mayflower, whatever, they came by the shores, but they had no idea what was waiting in the Midwest. They were told different things. They were told about the Garden of the Gods, the paradise that the Midwest was. They were told and warned about certain groups of savages, but they had no idea the danger that would lie ahead for them on the journey. And sometimes they were told a lie to get them to go there. They were promised things. In the New World, they wanted to go explore. They were told it was a garden of the gods. So many children got left behind. I don't know how they convinced them to leave their kids, but many women, when they went into the buildings in Detroit with a gaping door mouth, certain temples there, they were sacrificed. The boats that brought certain immigrants from all over, when they traveled to the epicenter, if brave enough, they never came back. Census records kept moving to different buildings and then burned up with fire after fire, leaving many without traces to their genealogies and illegitimate histories. Orphans were growing in numbers, the people were being killed off in the temples. New York City suddenly had the highest population of orphans and sent them all down to Oz, the Midwest, where there's burials, more burial mounds than anywhere, where there were walking cannibals for a very long time. Those with conflicts, knowing the past bleed through, were sometimes punished and put away because they had a schism and couldn't function in society. They'd have outbursts, resistance, create problems and trouble. There was friction, and it rendered them incapable of being reformed. Many mistakes were made by people and groups despite good choices and works in between. The balance was almost non structural sometimes when you saw between the lines, and in instances still felt confined behind enemy lines, though at all times. The hidden blood wars between the red and the white flag, the 13 stars for the 13 races that were overcome, then another 50 battles. The Council of 13 was nothing new. The red and white means something different to people of the old world and the stars and the star forts. So when we look at the Nephite, the Nephilim in the Book of Mormon, the mounds of giants, the fight to be the king of the mountain in America, the death tolls before any documented large-scale war had even happened, this set off a series of events and a domino of effects across the world in other little mini wars that sometimes were all connected. Much evidence of the Nephilim Wars are buried in the Great Lakes, which at one point didn't even exist as Great Lakes. The Nephilim spirits fully manifested in the tribe leaders, and they had tech fully activated and in their hands. The Aztecs had tech encoded into their very languages and in their bodies in their cybernization. War chiefs that kept track of civilizations as clan leaders were much more than that with the South American influence. Inca, Maya, Aztec gods dominated regions and colonies through their hybridized humans. Vikings did come to America too, but they were not victorious considering the men were up against demigods in flesh suits that predated the Vikings even. And Vikings were sacrificed here too on occasion. The first rulers of Americans were beings that you had to bow down to for sustenance and survival, or you would be hunted and killed. So it was like a Hunger Games here. The food of the gods was their motto, and many tribes scattered and hid. They were embodiments of scattered gods. So they ran the establishments for a while, and since these were also feudal tribes at heart, the lower classes were always plotting to take over the largest rulers. Spiro and Itowa were tribes documented before 1300 even here in North America. Caral Supe was the oldest documented city in South America. And then we go to the fairy furnaces. Those come from the Middle East, and those are also in America and other parts of the world. And these were not good devices. These things were used and built to cook humans in. Castle Rock in Wisconsin was a mile-long complex that the military covered up and said was part of an island from the glacier times. And its remains literally shows petrified, fossilized faces and entities and beings that are all melted together with their faces sticking out from the fairy furnaces. La Crosse, Wisconsin also has a stellar supernatural crossroads and many files too. The postal office there was a building that harbored fish bat people from the times of Atlantis. They were like a Pantagonian type of weird ancient creature. They fed and drained tons of innocent victims for decades as an oddity even from Pantagonian times. They were preserved and even recreated. And some of the human agents that were basically non-human that were working with these fallen powers, they would actually try to recreate some of these beings to keep as like pets. So the place got taken over by bats one day, and the decay was so bad in a building like this, it couldn't be rectified but only demolished, and for very good reason. It's like a monster swimming pool in the basement that should have never existed in the first place. And then they put this being, this fish-looking fish bat entity right on the side of the building in a huge stone, marking it. So then you get weird last names that come out of these beings, like Gilbreth and fish last names and other things that are they're hybridized lines from way back. So before the turn of the century to the 1800s, Q files were quantified and taken and hidden from the remaining Galactic Federation to prevent another realm breach. The Galactic Federation of Lyrans and other beings that tried to conquer Earth. That's all they are. So no census could be taken before close to this time because society had to be in a certain growth pattern and a ratio, and surviving here and thriving here somewhat to have a baseline to be documented properly for future logistics and to cross-reference and look back to. So Aztlan, Wisconsin is also an Aztec marker. The capital city was once named Aztlan in South America of the Aztecs. Now it's named a mythical city. So many feared coming to the Americas, especially at the bottom of South America, which is still not acceptable to traverse. What migrated up from South America found roots in the northern parts at one time. So it's a hidden war between the Americas. So the land had to be cleared. Chilaga, which Aborigines developed, or Chicago, Checagou, St. Louis, KC, central hubs to the clearance stations, which was more, there were ceremonial stations, train, tram, tech terminals, crux points of ancient Aztec hybridization societies, and also for Atlantean looking Cincinnati stations and other points that were all connected together. They had a society here. It was a high point for the lower hubs, Cincinnati, Ohio, like a capstone of a pyramid and a colony where the highest of rituals were done at the train station. So people that didn't go, because it was a temple, so people that didn't go through the World's Fairs or mini scale models of them would have a knee jerk reaction when they saw the Mayan temples again. If they go like past the train station, they'd freak out and they didn't know why. And this would happen over and over. So many people had to continually get reformed because people were losing it if they saw a train station or other things. And they did need, they needed help. They needed mental help and therapy. Many were mind wiped, many were conditioned to the present, and the population burst and then it waned. And it was a very erratic time period. So people would become desensitized over time. They'd stop having panic attacks spread through the atmosphere because the atmosphere itself was a very fragile lattice, like their fragile psyches. And it had to be observed. The Bureau's plan was to dissolve all the loose energy that had been built up in people first from being released into the delicate atmosphere's energy, and they found a way through therapy and other means to diffuse it so people could rebuild themselves from the ashes. It was a slow release of diffusion in people's bodies and their energy damage, and a slow diffusion from the energy of architectural structures, which were temples that were anchored into the grid work. And these two areas were dealt with differently. So the atmosphere had been devastated by the energy wars, and people's bodies were too. They were falling apart, they were deteriorating. The only thing that kept strong was the buildings, the architecture. And people had soul ties to the buildings. And on a mass scale level, they had to sever those soul ties from the builders' buildings. But the mental, psycho, spiritual, emotional parts of humans that could create a consciousness surge of panic again in the land had to be flattened, that had to be dealt with. And the plans to do this will not be popular now as they come out and are disclosed, but the veils, the band-aids, have to come off. They're necessary to reveal the whole truth. Individuals would try to get spiritually recalibrated as they process deeper things and unlock certain collective areas of themselves that had been dormant. The plan was never to harm or kill anyone, but to erase the bloody legacy of America's beginnings from our minds and the embarrassment of the subjugation, in the hopes that we'd become a better people with no crippling effects from the time wars and world embarrassment as the weakest nation instead of the strongest. People projecting panic and terror back into the aethers would have devastating effects, they found out in research. We took what we knew about the quantum physics and body healing dynamics and tried to project that into the environment with good intentions and use what was left over with light tools for healing. Terraforming our brokenness and bondage into liberation and a terraformed sky and a terraformed skyline and better things to look at. There was light therapy healing for some and energy harmonics for others. People started singing again in rocking chairs and talking clearer. They started remembering things. Everything seemed like it was locked in a time bubble, back and forth and back and forth. People were fragile. People had to be entertained, kept happy, see lovely and lavish things all around them so that they would want to live. They needed to create a life cycle to cancel out the death cycle that had consumed them and had the country running in fear, terror, and panic. So I'm not defending mind control, I'm just explaining what happened. In some severe cases, it actually pacifies and helps those who who would have killed themselves, and that would have had a domino effect on the rest of the society. Because back in that time, once somebody did something, they all did it, like the 100th monkey effect. So some people were actually treated in the institutions for good reasons. And humans by design are complicated beings. There were repercussions, and over time, yes, people did heal, but then murder rates came back again and increased again over time because we have a carnal sin nature. You can erase memories, mess with the time streams and realities, but you can't erase sin from man. Only God can, and wash us clean from that. So that was never taken into consideration in these projects and experimentations. It was a logistical risk and a reset that was successful, though. Nonetheless, God did have mercy on America. People lived, they survived this. The fear of a resurgence of the old gods was also a driving factor in the genocide of Native Americans. It isn't justified, it was a miscalculation on some parts of what they thought was not humanity in the Native American tribes and what actually was. They were looking for the savages in faces that weren't them. This was tragic and this was wrong on many levels. And when faced with the off-world aspects of certain intergalactic wars that were written off as other types of wars, I view this as like weeds that strangle out the good seed, the good life. And you have to choose humans in the end. You have to want to resurrect what's still good in humanity. Even in the cosmos, we're the superior species. That's the reality. We've just been dumbed down more than once. So, yes, I miss parts of the old world, but I long for the new heaven and the new earth and anything we need to be taught in between that time frame. Like I said, that's hanging on God's wall, his will to come, divine right timing. So we can't get help from on high at the levels God wants to bring it down if we can't even trust Abba Father enough to receive it. We lost our momentum. If we get hyper focused on something bad, we lose sight of what's good. Then we don't even know what's good or bad for us anymore. We're more precious than all the tons of gold that was melted to make the temple, because we are the temples now. And all together, people who house the Holy Spirit, we can house the living God like never before in history. And that's what the devil fears. We've already seen the worthlessness of the temples, and that way, which may have seemed right to some people, but only leads to death. So why does the devil want us to focus on things lost in the past? So that we don't build upon the hope of the glory to come, or the glory that's already here in the present. So the pronouncement of the Lord has been for Americans, upon the heads of my people, these are the redeemed of the Lord. And saints will come from their offspring and labor. He pronounced judgment upon the heads of the wicked, and all the remnants they carried from Babylon to overthrow him in their hearts couldn't hurt us anymore. So the red and white is the light coming through the bloody wars on the American flag for people who know the old world. And the blue bloods that walked the land were overcome with his stars, his people, his remnant. And they'll shine brighter than the firmament and bring many into the path of righteousness and back into heaven. Philippians 1:9-10. He has been gracious unto us. and wants us to intercede for each other in all things, all circumstances, and most of all for this land. The sins of the land is what punishes the people. America was freed from its original rulers. We could declare God Lord then, and the house of Jehovah over the land, under Deuteronomy 32:30 and Leviticus 26:8. So this all goes back to the fall. History repeating itself. Paradise was a cut off region as our original parents fell through the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and in its roots met Sheol down here. This is where the diagram of axis mundi and creation trees come from. Giant trees, the garden, this disconnect that happened created loneliness in the detachment from coming from a perfect Father God, our perfect parents, who we did come from, and who we were used to being around and walking with. Eden was one of the many Gan Eden gardens where beings already were. There was walking bipedal talking serpents there and flying ones too. And the seeds that Lucifer had already sown were in the cosmos and cosmic library brought here down to earth from the war in heaven. And some beings were soulless and some were redeemable, but most forgot who their real creator was, and in lies the problem. They forgot who they were. The creator is where all life's heartbeat flows back to, back into the heart of God. So it broke God's heart when so many people got turned away from him and went to this abominable path of human sacrifice in a very strange war of the Americas. When Elohim saw what the serpent did to enter Adam and Eve's bodies, he cursed the serpent to walk no more but to crawl and be mute. And the serpent lost its legs. The lamb that was in the garden appeared because in the beginning he said, "Here I am, send me." He was at the point of our inception and fall and with us from the very start. And he's at the point, the 2 points in his hands, at the very end of all things, the Aleph and Tav, and the very beginning. The Aleph and Tav stretched out like a canopy, the fabric of creation holding all creation together. He's the heart that houses all life and hears all life cry back to him. So how can he not be our intercessor and our advocate with the Father? How can we not want to be holy as he is holy? Yahushua nailed himself at the beginning and end of time, shedding his blood in the garden as that lamb slain from the foundations of the world, and then on earth so his substance would bring all heavenly reason back to the order in which God intended his creations to be in. He anchored himself in 2 points of time from the beginning to the end. He's going to rein in, like taking reins, the chaos that his creations make and have made, so that his creations can get it together and get in order. The fallen world that he entered when he became one of us lifted him up on a tree in mockery, but God lifted him up in glory for all of eternity. As every test we experience as humans, he took upon his own body and was broken by it. And by his stripes we're healed. He did all of this so that we could enter, all so that we could have a path back to the original state, all so that we could have a clean slate and come back home, spotless, unstained, washed clean from this experience that's a temporary dwelling, and bring us back to the ancient path. So what was wrong with resurrecting Atlantis is that we can't rule and reign with God and that first council when we think we're already gods now and can do it on our own. That's not the way it was supposed to be and work out. Sometimes we've had to learn over and over again as children down here to do it the right way, honoring what needs to be honored first and coming back to our first love with no fear of the Lord. Wisdom doesn't enter in as a precipice of the beginning of wisdom, your foundation that you step on. We need to respect what's perfect in power. Until the natives and whites really reconcile this past, this abominable satanic thing that happened between the Americas and how it broke God's heart, where human sacrifice was all over the land, until natives and whites really reconcile things and forgive and allow the great Creator to sweep over all of us as children of God again with new eyes, new hearts, and renewed minds, can the full circle of the spiritual and soul work cleansing be completed in the Americas. And that's the triumphal bridge. So let the river flow between these two nations and healing for the nations to come. Maranatha. Our hearts are like the rivers of Eden. Two rivers flowing out, two rivers flowing in, like a torus, the shape of our eye, that's concave, that's receiving and transmitting. Our hearts also represent so many things in creation. The reverse flow of the pillars of the earth that flooded the earth when moved, and then when they were opened up, the flood that happened. The letter Shin is written on Israel, and God also put it on our hearts. God's handprint is on our hearts. Yah has his finger on the pulse of the world. That's what this also tells me. And the word that he gives us and for the Americas, as they try to heal from this trauma and come full circle with it finally, in this awakening, is Psalms 31:7. I have seen the crisis in your soul. I am radiant with joy because of your mercy, for you have listened to my troubles and have seen the crisis of my soul. And God knows every spot between every crisis, every tribulation, and everything in between, to know how to mend and heal every broken piece and part of us. Because again, there is no brokenness in God, and there is only wholeness and a perfected end.